Good afternoon, and once again, I want to welcome you all to today's Maniac Talk. It's always a great honor for me to introduce our speaker, Dennis Andrucyk, Deputy Associate Administrator for NASA Mission Directorate. Today, I want to use a lot of different story that I have used in the past because I want to talk about cherry trees. You know, so that's the season for cherry trees. So I want to talk about the cherry trees. Then towards the end, probably we'll be able to figure out what I'm talking about. Okay, cherry trees. So they are kind of easy to maintain, as you know, and then they get really big, 12 to 15 feet. And they have an average lifespan of about 100 years. And some of them can actually live as long as 250, so they're important trees. In many parts of North America, they are among the first tree fruits to flower and ripen in mid-spring, and they're harvested in the summer. Sweet cherries are wonderful fruits, you know, and that's what I'm talking about, cherry trees. Once upon a time, a young boy would always accompany his father to the cherry garden. The garden was a place and a pastime where the father would sometimes go after work or on weekends to help his cluttered mind and feel grateful for simple pleasures and straightforward rewards, and a carry on. Both the son and the father would enjoy sweet cherries in their mouth and immediately enjoy their full flavor. The son learned a lot from his father, lots of things, including why a cherry need another tree for pollination, and not just one of the same variety, but a different variety of the same fruit. How to conquer the tall cherries by plopping a lander against it when picking the ripe fruits from the top. That's the only way you can get to the top. You got to use a ladder, go pick the nice one and pop them in your mouth and enjoy the flavor. And then he also taught him how not to fall. And if he fell, how to handle a fall. These are great lessons indeed. But more importantly, the sun-ripened cherries were always so delicious. And that's what brought out the best in this boy. So if you are very curious how traits are transferred from one generation to the next, then you need to go to the cherry garden. That's important. And express your wish to climb to the top of a cherry tree and wonder how you would use a ladder to give yourself a boost. When you get to the top, look at the world from another point of view, from farther away and from higher up. When an old timer tells you to scram and go to climb a cherry tree, you should go and actually climb a tree. Believe me, you'll be the one having more fun. So if you are curious about how to ride a fast horse from a GS1 all the way to SES, then go to a cherry tree. Dennis Andrucyk. How in the world did that happen? Please help me welcome our speaker, Dennis Andrucyk.
Thank you. When Kitabi asked me about doing this presentation back at the AGU in December, it was kind of a unique experience. It was a chance not to talk about engineering or talk about science, it's to talk about your career. I don't think you've ever done that before. So this is an experimentation. If you guys have any questions, please yell. We're going to do a, hey, how you doing? Welcome. Henning Leidecker. There you go, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the career. How did I go from a GS1 to an SES? But more importantly, what were some of the things that formed the values? How did I get, you know, the sort of, I won't say drive, but at least the family values, and what helped propel me along the way was really some information I got from mentors. That's me at 10 or 11, give or take. I don't remember exactly when. Full of wonder, full of, hey, looking forward to the future, not ready to be beat down yet. That's humor, by the way. It's okay to laugh. You'll find, by the way, I do have a kind of general motto, and I know a lot of people in the room very well, and hopefully you can vouch for this. I am incredibly deadly serious about doing a good job. First and foremost, you got to get the job done. But there's no rule that says you can't laugh about it along the way, tell a joke, have a good time. So you will hear me telling a lot of jokes, but please don't misinterpret that as not serious about doing a good job. Very serious about getting the job done. But things like speak your mind but ride a fast horse is one of those things, having a good time. And I find usually there's a bit of humor in almost every, or a bit of truth in almost every humor. I saw this it's actually painted and written on a shingle, like an old cedar shingle. I bought it in Tombstone, Arizona, on a business trip, a 2-week business trip in Tucson. Took the time to go out to Tucson to do a trip. I saw this and I was like, that's way cool. It is just hilarious. I laughed my rear end off because I do believe everybody should speak their mind. But the implication is, if you speak your mind in a negative way, you got to have a quick getaway. The key to success for me has been able to get the point across, but not need the horse. So when you talk about communication, the communication strategy is to talk to folks when you're speaking your mind in a way that you like to receive the information yourself. You know, how would you like to receive information? How would you like somebody to critique what you've done? We've all, or at least I know, I won't say we've all, I've made mistakes in my past. I've done bonehead things. And I don't want somebody or Henning to come up and say, hey, Dennis, that was a bonehead thing. He'll be talking about something in materials and I'll ask a stupid question. I've never once had Henning say, Dennis, that's a moron question. You should know that. No, he very patiently walks me through what needs to be. I'm sorry, Henning, I don't mean to pick on you. That's what happens when you come in 2 minutes late. I'll pick on Jessica next. But yeah, absolutely. But the point is to deliver messages, even negative messages, in a way that you'd like to get them. You'd like to be received. You'd like to receive the message. That's really key. Because if you don't, you're going to have problems in your career. And I'll tell you what, those problems will haunt you for a long, long time. People remember when you really dissed them or you really critiqued them in a way that was negative. So in my career, I've done everything I can to be positive along the way. So moving right along, oh yeah, so the title, GS1 to SES, how in the world did that happen? Good question. You'll see as we go through this, I didn't plan it that way. I'll get to that. Here I am in the early years. He said, talk about your childhood years and what were the formative years? How did things happen? My dad joined the military at a very early age. At 17 years old, he joined the U.S. Navy. Why? Because he lived in coal mining towns in northeastern Pennsylvania, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton area. Those are the big cities. It's not where he lived. He was born in Sugar Notch, Pennsylvania. Population, I think, about 5. And my mom was from Ashley, Pennsylvania, population about 10. Of course, I'm exaggerating. It's a couple thousand maybe in Ashley, but it's really only at a couple hundred in Sugar Notch. But he wanted to get away from the coal mining towns. But we grew up in a military, very structured lifestyle, very structured community. We grew up overseas on military bases. I was born in Japan. Matter of fact, Jessica Hamill, used to be Barton, worked with her mom for many years, Marg, and Marg's husband, Bob, thought I was Japanese because she had told him I was born in Japan, and she expected me to be Japanese. So the first day he met me, he goes, you can't be Dennis. You're a fat old bald guy. So anyway, born in Japan, spent a lot of time overseas, military dependent, where on a military base at the time, if you stepped out of line, it wasn't just the military members' performance that went into their fitness report, the family's performance. If a family member got out of line, it reflected in the parents' military report. So families were held accountable to a standard of behavior. So if I did something or any of the dependents did something, and a parent came out and disciplined you, there was none of this, oh, my kid got disciplined by somebody else. Oh, no. You got disciplined, you would pray they didn't call your parents because you'd get it again when you got home. It was that kind of environment, but I tell you what, that really helped set your family values. You set your core values. Join the Boy Scouts. Here I am, picture of me. This is part of the walk down memory lane. It was a lot of fun. And oh, by the way, another thing I'll tell you, I do have a neurological problem. It's called Charcot-Marie tooth. It's related to muscular dystrophy. It's a progressive disease that kind of affects the nerves. It does deteriorate the nerves in the hand and the feet. Migrates up the arms. Don't tell you that for any other reason than to let you know if you see me shaking or wobbling, I am not drunk, I am not angry, I'm not upset. It's just part of the deal. So shaking is part of the deal. And I am not going to use the laser pointer because of that shake. You will get sick trying to follow whatever I'm pointing because of that shake. So I'm not going to use the laser pointer. But here's me, graduating from Cub Scouts to Boy Scouts. Here's the pack leader talking, or excuse me, the troop leader, Troop 12 in Misawa, Japan, talking about the graduation, going from Cub Scouts to Boy Scouts. It was a great lesson in teamwork. I'll tell you what, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, they throw you out in the field and say, go do it. And you were responsible for what you took, how you treated the area, making sure that you set the camp, games, capture the flag, all that stuff. Great exercise in teamwork. It was awesome. Here I am. I also played the trumpet. By the way, there was I think a lot of old folks like me, no, there was no internet. As a matter of fact, on a foreign military base, you had one TV channel that played part-time. It wasn't 24 hours. You had one radio station that was part-time. So you had to find things to do. There was no Nats game to go to. So you joined the Boy Scouts, you played the trumpet. And in this case, I call it street fishing. When we weren't on the military base doing Boy Scout stuff, there's me in downtown Misawa, Japan. I have no clue what I was fishing for, but I'm sure you paid a couple of $100 and you got to fish for a couple of seconds to try and grab something out of that baby pool. But I don't remember that exactly, but when I saw the picture, I thought, this is way cool. But those are the kind of things we had to do back then. But it helped. It got you outside of the house. When our rule when we went out to play during the day was be home before the street lights came on. Didn't have cell phones, didn't have, it was just get on home when the time came. So we were out with friends all the time. It was a great experience growing up. Fast forwarding a little bit to the less early years, I mentioned, started out as a GS1, not just a GS1, a GS1 Step 1. It doesn't get any lower than that. My dad, who was in the Navy, and I'm being recorded, so I won't say what he actually said, but he said, you are lower than whale poop. And in the Navy, that means you're at the bottom of the ocean. There's nothing lower than the bottom of the ocean. But it was all meant in fun. My family kind of did the whole have a good time too, and the joke thing too. And as a joke, but more importantly, it had a message. My mom presented to me this Dennis Andrucyk executive nameplate for Christmas when I was 17 years old. I still have that nameplate. At that time, I was a GS1 working at NSA. I can say NSA now. Back then, I couldn't say NSA. When they put the sign up on the parkway that said National Security Agency, it blew my mind. It's like, oh my God, we can actually say that. But started out, the most I can say was as an electronics technician. So started out in electronics in high school. When I graduated from high school, I got promoted to a GS2. I was really moving up the ladder. Life was good. But I'll tell you what, when Mom gave me that, it was a good joke. Everybody had a good time. On my workbench was my executive nameplate. Everybody in the lab just had a grand old time laughing at that. But it's been with me forever. If you see, it's in my office now. It's always been in every office I've ever been in. It's 41 years old now. But while it was meant to be funny, this is my parents' subtle way of saying, hey, achieve more than we have. My parents, by the way, my dad worked his way through college in the evenings. He started out enlisted in the Navy. He and I got our degrees, not quite at the same time. He was a little before me, but not by much. We were the first two in the Andrucyk household to ever get college degrees. So that was a great, great message for me to, hey, live up to that. That was what they were telling me, but it was meant in a very funny way, and it came across in a funny way. It was really a lot of fun. So I would say that of all the stuff I've accumulated over the years, that is the most valuable thing in my office. And here's me at 17 with that nameplate and my Superman pajamas. Who says you can't have a sense of humor even when you're a teenager? During college years, drove a tow truck. Well, I had two jobs. I worked at the Naval Research Lab as a technician as well. That wasn't as fun, and you'd kind of expect that. But I drove a tow truck. Here's me driving the tow truck. That is the family 1974 Pinto station wagon. Those didn't blow up. It was the 73s and before that had the rear end fires because the rear bumper wasn't very substantial. Getting a rear end accident, gas tank would leak and had a tendency to catch fire. 74, they actually didn't do that much, but that was a family car. My mom drove it, then I drove it in high school, and then my sister drove it, and she wrecked it. But I towed it home, and this was when it was wrecked. It was wrecked after this. And after it was wrecked, she bought herself a Ford F-150. This is my younger sister. I'm in the middle of 3 kids. So she bought an F-350, drove it for about a year, and the engine blew up. So Dad was enlisted in the Navy. We didn't have a lot of money, so the thing was, if you needed to do something, you did it yourself for as much as you possibly could. So there's a picture of me, believe it or not, with my Amoco jacket on, and my dad rebuilding a Ford F-150 6-cylinder, 4.9 liter or 300 cubic inch straight 6 engine in the street. I mean, this is not in a lab or in a garage with jacks and lots of tools. Literally rebuilding it in the street. I wanted to take the hood off right away because I thought that would look cool. And Dad fought against it. He lost because I was the one who had some of the knowledge. We both had some knowledge, but between the two of us, we were good. Here you can see the head we pulled off. Here's the oil pan, the jack that we had to use to jack up the engine a little bit to get the oil pan out. Radiator, 4 of the pistons. I'm just pointing it out. You don't have to worry about this, but it was fun. Here's when we'd already replaced the bearings, and there's the 2 of us working on that one bearing. It was a lot of there's a kind of family bonding experience you just can't buy. It was so much fun. But I'll tell you what, this job of driving a tow truck was probably the highest satisfaction job I ever had. I've had some great jobs, but when you're driving a tow truck in the pre-cell phone days, and you show up to somebody that's stuck on the side of the road, they're happy to see you. Very happy to see you, because you're getting them out of a bad jam. So I don't even care if I was late. Oh, you're here. So it was a quick sense of satisfaction. It wasn't waiting 10 years for a launch. It was like 20 minutes later, people are happy to see you. This is that's a career. If it paid more, I'd still be driving a tow truck. But it was a great way to start out. And I learned a lot in that job, learned a lot with my dad working on projects. We did get the truck back together again, by the way, and it ran for another couple of years before my sister sold it. And it was running when she sold it. So it actually worked out very, very well. Graduated from college. There's me on the left, working on some hardware. By the way, my dad was in the Navy. He was in the intelligence service. Never knew what he did for a living. When I went to work for NSA. This is a true story. When I worked for NSA during the indoctrination on the first day, they scared the crap out of me. I thought there was a spy behind every bush. And they said, you can't say anything about anything to anyone ever, ever, ever in your life. So my dad actually worked there. I never knew what he did. So go home for dinner that night, living at home. So Dennis, where do you work? And I think about it, I can't tell you. What phone number do you have? And I would think even the normal outside number. It's like, can't tell you that either. And he asked me about 5 more innocuous questions that I now know I could have answered, but at the time I was terrified. Absolutely terrified. The next morning, I go to my lab and sitting at my bench and I feel this tap on the shoulder. I turn around and there's my dad. And he says, can you tell me now? What's that?
Could you?
Yes, actually, in that environment, I could. But it was great. I mean, it was really funny, absolutely hysterical. Here I am later on working as a contractor. Built some wire wrap cards, built some ground systems for spacecraft, and put all the cards together. You can see, and these are actually wire wrap cards. Each one of these is an individual card. You could probably jam all that stuff into an FPGA these days. But back then, this was hot stuff. Working the oscilloscope, working the logic analyzer, and the electronicers in the room will know that at this time, that box was functional. How do you know that, George? Any idea? Tupper? Tony? No cards are on an extender card with probes on them. So no, that was just after we got this thing put together. I was the lead, and we did a lot of the work. I did a lot of the personal work on that. And here's another job that I can't say anything about other than a bunch of us put together this, it's kind of obvious that it's a communication system. But we did this together, about 7 of us put this comm system together, these 4 trucks, in a little over a year. And we were actually given the proverbial management challenge. Can you do this? Because we don't think you can. We worked days, nights. It was crazy. We worked lots of hours, but we did it. It was awesome. We went from requirements to buying equipment, all off the shelf stuff, but buying equipment and putting this thing together and fielding it in a year. The reason I'm showing these charts is because over the years, I actually have had people come talk to me about being a mentor for them, helping them, giving them some advice in their career. And quite often, some of the younger folks, especially right out of college, are like, I want to become a lead, I want to become a manager. And my advice to them always is, get some practical experience first. If you understand how the system works from beginning to end, it doesn't matter if it's engineering or if it's science, human resources, procurement, contracts, whatever the field is, get some experience. Because you can't be it is my opinion that you cannot be a capable leader without having some of that school of hard knocks, knowing what works, knowing what doesn't work, knowing how to recover from problems, working in teams. I'm going to cover working in teams in the very near future. But all those skills are necessary as you move your way up into the management ranks or into the leadership ranks. And this was my path. So I would encourage anyone here, or if better yet, if you're also counseling somebody else, make sure they get some experience before they start taking on the true leadership roles, the management roles. I actually had a young lady when I came to Goddard. She got her PhD. She had been working for about 6-8 months, and she was getting recruited by headquarters. By the way, the person's still at headquarters. And she asked me what I thought. And my advice to her was, don't go. Stay here, get some practical experience, and then go to headquarters. You will be a much more effective leader, and you'll actually progress farther up into the ranks. She didn't take very well to that advice. She left, she went to headquarters, but along the way, she actually accused me of sexual harassment and thought that I was trying to hold back her career based upon her gender rather than based upon practical experiences. So we've worked it out over the years. As a matter of fact, she came back to me about 10 years later as she's trying to break into the SES ranks and going, what's wrong? I said, you don't have the practical experience. And she actually got that feedback from some job interviews. So please get the practical, and she agreed with that. So she was one who actually came back to me and says, I get it now. So please consider getting the practical experience before you move into the management ranks. This was mine. Well, and some other stuff that I don't have pictures of. The career jungle gym. Yes, this is me on a jungle gym before the hands got really, really bad. And another guy trying to get me out of the way because I still wasn't very good at the jungle gym at that time. But you ever read the book, Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In? It's about challenges women face in the workforce. It's an excellent book. I get no royalties from anything on this, but it's an excellent, excellent book. I'd highly recommend it. One of the concepts that Sheryl talks about in her book is there is no career ladder, at least not in her career, and I would say mine's the same way. It's more like a career jungle gym. You don't go straight from one job to the next, to the next, to the next, and just climb up a ladder. You're moving sideways several times, maybe even sometimes down the ladder, down a rung before you move over. And that's, if you look at any of the senior leaders around here, that's what you get. That's how you get into the senior ranks. It's not a real secret recipe, but the career jungle gym is a great analogy. It's not my analogy, but I love it, enough so that I put it in the chart. So I would consider you to think about the career jungle gym if you're thinking about moving up. Because actually, some of the jobs you want might not even be available. And a sideways move might be the best opportunity to get some experience along the way. This is me in a nutshell. Any questions? So, upper left, National Security Agency. I can actually put it on the chart. GS1, step 1, promoted to a GS2, step 1, along the way. And I left that job to go to college. When I started at the ripe old age of 19 at the gas station, didn't trust me with the tow truck keys just yet. Started out pumping gas, working through the gas station. That's where I learned about rebuilding engines, plus what my dad knew. And started working as a tow truck driver, and again, I love that job. Even after I graduated from college in '82 with my undergrad, I kept that job for another year. It was fun. Naval Research Laboratory, the other job during college was a GS4 there. I think, George, you said you were a GS4 starting. GS4, and during that time frame, got promoted to a GS5. Woohoo! I'm moving up. When I finally did graduate, now this is interesting. The government salary being offered to me at the time was $15,900 a year. And this is back in 1982. And it sounds like a really low salary, but at the time it was actually not terrible. It was competitive. But Westinghouse was offering me $25K. So I went $15,900, $25K. It took me about a millisecond to make that decision. and I went to private industry. And so worked for Westinghouse, General Electric, and Northrop, and some of those pictures are from these jobs where I got my practical experience actually building things and I got laid off in here, by the way. Some of these jobs were not a lot of fun in that they were a contract job. At Goddard, we have contracts. They come to an end. We usually recompete them, and people wind up moving from one contract to the next. And some of these other jobs, you're actually tasked to do a specific project, and when that project is over, if they haven't won a new contract, you're gone. At GE, they closed it was in Lanham. They closed the whole facility. Well, I think they kept about 2. They closed the facility. And it was an honor bestowed upon me. I got to be laid off last. And but I had enough time to find another job. And when I had that other job, and the new company, the Northrop company, said, come work for us right now, or we're going to rescind the job offer. And GE wanted, can you stay on for another 2 weeks? And the answer was no. And I didn't. I went to work for Northrop. From there, I got a job here at Goddard. It was an awesome job, working BBXRT. I was the deputy INT manager, so I'm weaseling here by saying INT management. I was really the deputy. Bob Casa was the INT manager. That was a great job, working with Frank. That was a great job, launched in 1990 on Space Shuttle Columbia. Wonderful job. Got promoted to being the INT section head. We don't have section heads anymore, but back then you had branches of 50 or 60 people. You had sections of about 8 to 10 people within the branches. Got to be the section head, but somewhere in this time frame, I wanted to know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I mean, back in the early days when I was figuring out what I wanted to do in college, I knew I loved to take things apart and put them back together again. So engineering was a really easy sell for me. Didn't know if it was going to be mechanical or electrical, and a true story is I flipped a coin and came up electrical. But I'm perfectly happy with mechanical, and a lot of the same equations hold true. It's just a matter of how you apply them. So in around here, I thought, what do I want to be when I grow up? And my answer to myself was I'll stay with the government, wanted to stay with NASA, love the work that NASA was doing, love the work Goddard was doing. So around here, I decided I want to be a division chief. Don't care which division. For the same reason I didn't care whether it was electrical or mechanical. I wanted to be a division chief because as a division chief, you're an SES for starters, which is kind of a nice perk. But more importantly, you're still close to the hardware, close to the people that are developing the systems, but you're also having a say in the strategic direction. What kind of projects you want to take on, how much you're going to put into training, how do you help the people? And I thought that was a great place to be. So my goal here was to be one of those division chiefs. And that was what I wanted to do. And I set my sights on trying to accomplish that by being as good as I could possibly be along the way. So got to be an INT section head and INT section head in the same branch. By the way, this is currently 568 because there was a reorganization along the way. If anybody wants to know how this translates into current branches, that's 568. So I went to be individual contributor to a section head to an associate branch head, and then in that associate branch head job, the division chief said, hey, why don't you go be an associate branch head in a sister branch, 735, which is now 561. And my response was, yeah, I'll do that. I didn't agonize on it. I didn't care. I knew the people there. Danny Dalton was the branch head. Great person. So one of the things I put in the blurb for this is be ready to say yes. And that's been my career motto all along, unless I think it's a really stupid thing. And I haven't been presented with too many of those. I've always said yes whenever somebody's asked me if I want to go do something. So I moved from one branch to the next branch. It was wonderful. We were building the command and data handling systems for several missions, XTE, TRIM along the way. It was a lot of fun. A couple of months into this, Danny Dalton, the branch head, got a very, very deadly disease. I won't go into what it was, but he was out on sick leave for a very extended time. He ultimately did recover, but it was touch and go for a while. He almost passed away. But while I'm there, back then the rule was individual contributors could work up to be a GS-15. If you wanted to get a 14, you had to be an associate branch head. If you wanted to be a 15, you had to be a branch head. There was none of this getting a 15 as an associate branch head. You had to become the branch head. And Danny was still on sick leave and encumbering the position. So I wanted a 15. And I'm going to cover this later on. It's okay to ask for another job if you're trying to seek advancement or additional money. No problem. That's part of the career growth. So I didn't have the nerve to ask the boss for a raise. But what I did do was apply for a sister branch when it came open. Didn't really want the job, but I applied for it. I go into this is going to be called my 15-second job interview, because that's about how long it lasted. I applied for the other branch head job. I go to the interview, and back then there weren't panels. It was just the division chief that was interviewing you. And the division chief at the time was Don Kruger in the old code 730 days. You probably remember him. A couple of people probably remember Don Kruger. First thing he said to me was, "Dennis, do you really want this job?" And I looked at him straight in the eye, and it also pays to think things through ahead of time. And I looked him right in the eye and said, "Nope, I want the GS-15." And him, without batting an eye, said, "If I can get you the GS-15 staying in that job, running the branch while Danny's out, would you be happy?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "Done." And we talked about new command and data handling systems for the next 59 minutes and 45 seconds of that job interview. And so really, it was that fast. It was that quick of an interaction. But I got my 15. He was true to his word. Not sure how he pulled it all off, but it did happen. After Danny retired, he recovered from his illness. I got moved to the Flight Data Systems branch. From there, I applied to and was selected as the associate chief of 560. So I'm getting closer towards my goal. I was offered the chief technologist job for the center. Back then, it wasn't in code 100 where Peter Hughes is now. It was in code 500. So I became the Goddard chief technologist. And along the way, I was applying to the SES Candidate Development Program. And I've got a bullet later on to remind me of this, and I'll skip it when I get to it. But in these jobs, remember my goal was to be the SES, don't care what division. I wanted to be an SESer. So I applied to the SES Candidate Development Program. The first time was rejected. Okay. Second time, they were happening every 2 years back then. Second time I applied, was rejected. Now, my feelings aren't hurt. That's a lie. I was crushed. I'm in this job thinking, GS-15 is not a bad place to be. About a week before the job announcement closed, Mike Ruskevich, who was the director of it at the time, said, "Dennis, your name's not in the hat this time for the SES CDP." And I'm like, "No, Mike, it's okay. I get it. I understand. I'm perfectly happy. I got a really good job." And he said, "But you don't understand. You're thinking about it wrong." Okay, enlighten me. I had come to the wrong conclusion. In those previous times I had applied, there were people with greater qualifications than I had. And they got selected. I wasn't selected because they didn't like me. I wasn't getting selected because I didn't have the qualifications of the people who were ahead of me in their careers. By the time I had gotten to this point on the third time, the message was, "You've now got the experiences you need to be successful in the SES Candidate Development Program." And I'm like, there's a blinding flash of the obvious. So I spent that week applying, and I got selected. But it wasn't about, I totally misread what the information being presented to me was intending to convey. So that's one of the lessons learned. Another lesson learned was in this job, by the way, as the head of the Flight Data Systems branch. I don't know how many of you remember Don Kruger. He was an awesome technical talent. I don't think they came better. Henning is an awesome technical talent, and Don would rival Henning. I don't know if you disagree with that, Henning. My tires will be flat when I go back out to the car. But Don was a great technical talent. People skills, maybe not as strong. When you would go in and say, "Hey, Don, I just got these cards tested. I just did this. We got these ASICs in." He never once said, "Good job." Never once said, "Good job." His question was always, "Well, what about steps 2, 3, and 4?" And I'm like, okay, I'll go do steps 2, 3, and 4, and out I go with my tail between my legs. I thought he was dumping on me. I really did. And I didn't fully appreciate, again, the message that was coming to me. I went and talked to, Don was like a stinking god. And when it came to spacecraft architectures and developing systems, you didn't want to question, well, maybe that's too strong. Sorry if I don't want to offend anybody. But he was considered a very high person in the architecture, I should say, when it came to being able to build flight systems. So I didn't want to hit him with my petty, "Why are you picking on me?" thought. So I went to his deputy, Ed Powers, and I said, Ed, what's going on here? Why is Don just beating on me? He always wants the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and I get we need to do the next thing, but can't we just celebrate today for at least a millisecond before we go on to the what didn't you do? And Ed's message to me was, you don't understand. I keep getting this you don't understand thing. It's a common theme. I said, okay, you're right, I don't understand. Enlighten me. He said, and Ed's message was, who is Don spending his time with? He got really excited about the command and data handling systems and the progress we were making on some of these systems. And I was in his office constantly. And the message from Ed was, he's spending his time with you. That's his way of showing his gratitude. His gratitude, the way he expresses his gratitude, is by giving you the next task. And I was like, okay, another blinding flash of the obvious. And it was really a strong message to me, is when you're looking at how the cards are being played, if something doesn't make sense, ask. Because you might be missing a piece, you might be missing a card. And in both of those cases for me, I was missing a card. And I totally misread it. Went and did my stint downtown in the SES CDP for a little over a year. That was a very rewarding experience. Came back to finally got my wish. So I was the deputy of 560. You got to be the division chief of 590. And I'll go through some of this a little faster. But it's worth mentioning, I was having a grand old time in 590. That's where I met George and a bunch of other people sitting in the audience. Talking to Orlando Figueroa, who was at the time the director of engineering, one evening, the division chief of 580 had retired. And Orlando's comment was, we're looking for somebody that could be the new chief of 580. This was, when you want to get to a busy person like in Orlando, you go see him at 5 o'clock at night. That's when you, but that's a tidbit for everybody. You want to get to a busy person, go in the evening, because that's when they don't have meetings and they're trying to get their job done. So interrupt them so they can't do their real job. But they're always willing to talk. And so over about an hour and a half, Orlando and I were talking about what he wanted to do in 580 and how he thought it maybe needed some reorganization. And I said, well, I'll do it. And part of that whole yes thing, I said, I'll do it. And he looked at me, he said, full-time or part-time? So whatever you need. Permanent or just a detail? Whatever you need. I'm willing to go do it full-time. I'm willing to be reassigned. Whatever you need, I'll go do it. And he's like, I really want to think about this. But before I can make any decisions, I've got to run it through center management. I've got to run it through headquarters. We just don't move in SES without checking the right boxes. The government's very big into boxes. We have to check them. And this was no different. So by the time we left, it was like 6:30 at night. And he admonished me, don't you tell a soul. This has to stay quiet while I do the homework. I get in the next morning. At the time, I wasn't getting in at 7 o'clock. I was more of like a crack of 8:30, 8:45 kind of guy. And there's a note on my door, go see Orlando. Oh, what have I done wrong now? I didn't think at all it was this 580 gig because he had to go run the lines to make sure it worked. I go up to see him. He throws other people out of his office, calls me in and said, congratulations, you're now the division chief for 580. It happened that fast, like in 1 business hour. Those things can happen, but it's all because I expressed an interest and showed him that I was willing to take on another assignment. Then, let's see, got moved up to be the deputy director of engineering and director of engineering. Another person who had the same mentality, by the way, Felicia Jones-Selden, who's now the director of engineering. When I became the director, I needed a deputy because now the job was vacant. I called Felicia and said, I can't offer you the job just yet. And by the way, I picked on Felicia because she'd been to NOAA. She'd been all over the place. She had an instrument background. She's had a very diverse background. I called her on the phone and says, if I can offer you the job, would you be interested in being my deputy? Without a millisecond's worth of hesitation, she said, yes. Cool. For me, that was okay, but I said, don't you want to think about it? And she said, no. I've worked with you for years. I've known you on and off. I know how you work. I know what your personality's like. And no matter what it is, I know what all the duties will be. We'll split them evenly. I know you. I know we're going to find a nice, even split, and this will work just great. So I had my answer immediately. It was very refreshing. I'm going to get to this on another bullet later. I can't tell you the number of job interviews I've done where people will apply, they'll go through the interview, we do our, roll the dice and all the good stuff, and we pick a person. OHR calls them and says, would you like the job? And they go, I want to think about it. And I kind of go, what? Trust me, folks, it happens. And be ready to say yes. Only once in my career, though, have I had somebody that kind of strung it along so long, I finally said, okay, rescind the offer. And I did, and they did. But be ready to say yes, it matters. Director of engineering, and coming down to the, that's how I got to headquarters, by the way. I was ready for a change. I've been doing the director of engineering job here for 5 years as a director, 2 years before that as a deputy. I talked to Scalise and Robert Lightfoot. Is there something else I can do? Not that it's a bad job. I love my job. But I was ready for a change. The first day on the job, Steve Andrucyk, who was the deputy of the Space Technology Mission Directorate, called and left me a message. Said, want to talk to you on Wednesday. And that's all I got. I've known Steve for years and years, but we hadn't worked together in a long time. So I said, one of two things. Steve wants to chew me a new one, Steve wants to let me know we're doing poorly on an STMD-funded activity, or he's going to ask me to be his deputy. So I went through the divisions, and I said, okay, of all the stuff we're working on for STMD, what's the status? And we were actually doing okay. So just like Felicia, I said, if he wants me to be his deputy, the answer's going to be yes. So sure enough, Wednesday we call, and his first words were, hey, thinking about 2 people to be my deputy, you're one of those 2 people. Would you be interested? And just like Felicia, without batting an eye, I said yes, and gave him the same answer. When he said, that quick? I said, yep. Called me 2 days later on Friday and said, and he said, are you still interested? And I said, yep. And he said, you're it. That's how I got there. So just being ready to say yes is really a motivator for folks in leadership positions in selecting other leaders. I won't go through the rest of the stuff. I wound up at OCT and then now moved over to SMD. Fight or flight, dealing with conflict. Trust me, you're going to have conflict in your career and in your home life or along the way. I love this little sign. This is not a great graphic, but I've got this little plaque. It's only about 2 inches square, maybe 3 inches square. It says, neither seek nor shun the fight. I don't go out for a fight. I'd rather solve things very calmly, very, collegially and make things happen. That's kind of my first mode of operation. But if somebody brings a fight to me, Katie, bar the doors, there's going to be a fight. Don't want it. And by the way, please don't go out and say, hey, Andrucyk is supporting workplace violence. No. No, not at all. By the way, another Krugerism, and actually I might have said this before, Don Kruger, he had some great quotes. One of his quotes was, emotion and logic cannot occupy the same head at the same time. And and he told me this when I was angry. And it didn't sink in until that night because I was in an emotional state. And that stuck with me because when I was emotional, I couldn't be logical. So when I say, bring on the fight, it's not yelling and screaming. It's not sending nasty emails or you're an idiot email like I was talking about earlier. It's about being logical, choosing your battle. If you go through any military strategy school, where you fight, how you do it, greatly increases your chance of winning. There's no such thing as a fair fight. You want to win. And by choosing how, and I'm using the word fight in a somewhat flip manner, on purpose. In order to get your way might be a better way to describe it. But you want to choose how you convey the message. You want to choose in what venue you talk to the person that you're having a difficult time with. Try to see a win-win. Try to see something that's going to work for both of you. That should be the first method. So when I say Katie, bar the doors, there's going to be a fight, that's for drama purposes. But you really want to work with the person to try and get things to happen and really make things happen. As soon as you steamroll somebody, you've lost a colleague forever. The best way in that fight to win is to do it such that everybody walks away a winner. Sometimes that can't happen. You do have to push your way, but that should be your first method of trying to make things happen. But the really important thing is choose the fight. Choose how you're going to do it. And if you know in your heart you're going to lose, don't do it. You should have that logical discussion with yourself. And by the way, sometimes in order to get myself out of an emotional state, I'll write a nasty gram email. And by the way, if you ever do this, make sure the to-line is blank. Because it's real easy to accidentally send a nasty gram email. So, write that or do whatever you have to do to get it out of your system, park it for a couple days, and you'll usually be calm, and then go out after to get your way, to get what you think you need to do. But don't do it when you're in an emotional state. From personal experience, I know it doesn't work, and it actually hurts what you're trying to accomplish. So that's kind of the fight or flight lesson I would give you. In the background, you see Kool-Aid, a Kool-Aid pitcher and a couple Kool-Aid cups. For those of you who might be too young, there's a lot of old people like me in this room who remember the Reverend Jim Jones in Guyana, where he actually killed off his entire cult using poisoned Kool-Aid. Not advocating poisoned Kool-Aid at all. Again, no violence, no violence. But the phrase, sometimes you got to drink the Kool-Aid, is still around. And it means that when you're not going to win and you don't see an easy way out, what can you do to make lemonade out of the lemons you've got? And that's probably what you need to put into the pitcher is lemonade, because how do I make the best out of a situation? And that's what I'm trying to convey on this, and it works. That got bright. Embracing failure. I'm going to make my story short because I've already got 45 minutes. Long story short, trying to buy some parts for the XTE and trim program. I was the branch head. Phil Lewis, Phil's not in the room. He was my section head at the time. Needed to buy some parts from Honeywell. It was a processor and a data system on a multi-chip module. The prices that we were quoted were significantly higher than what we needed, or what we had budgeted, because we didn't consider minimum buys. I asked Phil to go buy the parts anyway, to the tune of almost $2 million in the hole that we didn't have, but it was another project called Time. This was for XT and trim. That Time needed the parts. Cool, I'll just, the budget process back then allowed me to do that. Everybody pooled their money into a single contract, and I could actually go negative on my task if I didn't tell anybody. Big mistake. We got the parts we needed. The task went $1.8 million negative on my part of the task, but a lot of other people had put money in for their work. So the task actually looked like it was still positively funded until we got to the end of the fiscal year. When they did an audit and it showed that I was that negative, I got called to the principal's office. And by the way, Phil was the one who actually did this, and he's like, you're going to give me top cover if this blows up. When it did blow up, I got called to the center, or the engineering director of, and got to go see the center director. And they reminded me that doing these kind of things can get you fired. And you actually should be fired if you spend $2 million of government money that you didn't have. And I said, thank you very much. And my punishment, instead of firing me, which I'm glad they didn't, I'm still here. And by the way, that other mission did buy the parts, so they got reimbursed. But at the end of the fiscal year, when they had to balance the books, there were a lot of irritated people who had all their money swept up to cover my mistake. So the parts were ultimately used, but I was persona non grata for a while because of the way I had handled that. My punishment was to read the FAR, the Federal Acquisitions Requirements. Never, ever, ever get yourself in a position, unless you're in contracts or procurement, where you have to read the whole FAR. It is boring. It's very important, but trust me, it's boring. That was my whopper of an error. I got into an SES interview one time, and they said, tell me one of your failures. And I used that as the example. And one of the people on the review panel, Alda Simpson, was responsible for coming up with the money to cover my mistake. And as I started to tell the story, she goes, oh, no, you're not going to tell that story. I did. I didn't get the job. But everybody fails. Starts out, for me, it was in Cub Scouts. Who's got the cleanest campsite? It wasn't me. But everybody fails. And further on in life, that was my failure. Anyone who says they haven't failed, I would suggest hasn't been pushing themselves hard enough. At NASA, it's hard not to fail. We're not building 10,000 of the same widgets every day. We're doing new and exciting things every day, new processes. Something's going to happen. But if not, that's if you're working for Chevy and you're in a job where you have no flexibility, responsibility, or authority, yeah, maybe you're not going to fail. But there's going to be home failures. I would suggest that anybody who says they haven't failed doesn't want to admit it if they're working for NASA. We all fail. And trust me, the senior leaders know that. The question is, what do you do about it? How do you recover? What have you learned? And how are you going to go forward with that knowledge? That's the real message. I love the great Wayne Gretzky quote. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And if you live your life so conservatively that you're not taking any shots and great, you're not failing, but are you really, really pushing the NASA agenda or your own career ahead? Finally, on that, consistent with that is, don't expect others to push you. Some people might. Don Kruger pushed the heck out of me. I think I got 30 years worth of experience in the 10 years I worked for Don Kruger. But not everybody does that. It's got to come from within. When you see an opportunity, bring it up to your boss. Don't just go spend $1.8 million you don't have. But bring up the opportunity. Go push. If you make a mistake like I did, own up to it. I didn't at the right time. When I was caught and they said, how did this happen? I went, okay, yeah, not Phil. Phil didn't do this. This is me. Phil's name is on the thing, but I did it. That was not Phil. And if you don't know something, ask. Finally, and if asked in a job interview, give a real example of a failure, for crying out loud. I have interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, and there's always a question on an interview panel, tell me about a failure and what you've learned about it. We don't want to critique what your failure was unless it's something really, truly stupid. But for the most part, people's failures are because they legitimately wanted to do the right thing and it didn't go well. Talk about it and what you learned. I get people all the time trying to turn a failure into a positive. What's your failure? Well, or my weakness or my failure? I work too much. Come on. You're trying to make it sound like I work too much. In other words, if you hire me, my failure is I'm going to bust my butt 20 hours a day. I don't want somebody working 20 hours a day. I can give you other examples, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to. Give a real example to a failure or a weakness. First rule in decision making, at least my rule, if a bad decision made for all the right reasons is still a bad decision. I can't tell you the number of times over my career there's something that's an obvious bad decision. And I'll give you one example. In the hiring process, you get a cert, and the people on the cert, you might go, I think some of them might be able to do the job, but I'm not positive. I can give you other examples too, by the way. I'm just going to hit this one because it's an easy one. Interview everybody, and you go, I'm still not sure, but I think I can coach this person. Hire him, yeah, bad decision. Because not everybody has the skills for a given job. Doesn't matter, doesn't mean that person was a bad person, but just not the right fit for that job. And all the coaching in the world that I was going to do was not going to change that. So I had an icky feeling in my stomach when I did that. I made the decision, and it turned out to haunt me. Ultimately, had to work with that person, get them into a different job, and they were successful. So it wasn't terrible, but every time I've had that feeling in the pit of my stomach where I shouldn't do something, I shouldn't have done it. And it really has come back to haunt me every stinking time. I can't say that there's hundreds of those things, but probably 4 or 5 things where I didn't listen to that inner voice. Yeah, I regretted it. More on decision making. Disposition problems quickly. Wrong position. I'm going to go through this quick. I hit some of the highlights. You got to say no when you need to. Own your own situation. This is not just about decision making. This is just about getting the job done. Stop worrying about what other people have. I can't tell you the number of people who say, well, so-and-so's got a bigger budget. Okay, what are you going to do yourself to boost your budget? Try not to tear somebody else down. What can you do to make your own situation better? Develop a plan is really important when you make a decision. If you just make a decision without having any idea how you're going to make that happen, yeah, you're kidding yourself. And that comes up in decisions have to be made. Not making a decision is making a decision to do nothing. And you're going to hope that things will get better. And Juan Ramon, who's not here, I used to hear him say this like every week, hope is not a management tool. And that's very true. Be objective, listen to people, challenge the prevailing thought. Teamwork will get you a lot of different inputs. And as a matter of fact, a lot of them are real good. But be aware of groupthink. Groupthink is when you go down the list. Henning, you agree? Jessica, you agree? Missy? When you get to Betsy, if they've all said yes, it's hard for Betsy to say no. But if the answer is no, you got to say no. And I strongly agree with that. An early decision is better than waiting later on. And revisit, this is a pet peeve of mine, revisit decisions only when there's new information to process. If somebody comes in, we make a decision in a group, somebody comes in later on and says, I was thinking about that, and I just don't like it. We need to reverse it. And if they don't have some reasons why not, yeah, forget it. No, we're not doing that. Got to have new data in order to make a new decision, or to reverse things. Own my own leadership pearls. There's no they in management. You're it. This is as you move into management. Don't worry about what they said. Focus on you and what you need to do. Your group will reflect your values and attitude. Let me tell you, if you've got a lousy attitude, your group's going to have a lousy attitude. If you've got a positive attitude, it's contagious. People will have a positive attitude. even when things are going bad. They look for opportunities when things are going bad. When things are going bad and you have a negative attitude, that's when you get into the blame game. Blame game doesn't solve problems. Focus on the future, learn from the past. I think that's it. Work and home life balance. I stink at it. I have people saying, how do you manage that? The answer is I don't. I'm terrible at it. But I'm responsible. There's nobody in my management chain that's saying, Dennis, you got to work 10, 12 hours a day. I am a serial husband. Okay, let that sink in. It's okay to laugh. I helped tank my own first 2 marriages because I was working too hard. I was putting in way too many hours. 3rd time's a charm because I married another workaholic. And it's actually been really good. I'm responsible. Praise publicly, critique privately, deliver bad news promptly and personally, and the parking ticket analogy. If you don't do this promptly, the longer you wait to tell somebody that there's a mistake, the worse it's going to get. Just like not paying a parking ticket. It's going to cost you more in the long run to handle things. So deliver bad news promptly and personally. Think of challenges as something to overcome, not obstacles. There's going to be challenges, lots of them. That's the nature of our game. If NASA does one-of-a-kind things, there's a challenge every stinking day. And if we focus and get so caught up in it and don't think of them as something to overcome, you start wallowing in what I had on the previous channel and what other people, chart and what other people have. Think of challenges as an obstacle, overcome them, and remember, rewards go to people who find solutions. How many times have you heard somebody get an award? Oh, they really screwed up. They didn't do anything about it, but they screwed up. No, but they don't get an award. The awards go to the people that screwed up. Well, don't go out and screw up on purpose. But if you do have a chance to help solve a real problem, that's where the rewards come in. That's where promotions come in, cash awards, et cetera. It's really great. Get out of your comfort zone. I think I'm beating this say yes to death, so I'm going to skip over that one. Lessons learned from mentors. One of the things from my dad, work hard, and you will usually be amply rewarded. But there will be times when only perseverance will carry you through. I got to tell you, that has stuck with me forever, and it's really an important thought. Usually you do get rewarded, but there have been times when I'm kicking the curb and going, what the heck happened? Get beyond it. Don't worry about it. Focus on the next thing. And he was right. The other thing he would say, if the customer wants a green suit, you turn on the green light. So much so that when he retired, they handed him a plaque with a green bulb screwed into it. But the real message was, don't just sugarcoat things. Don't say no. Say yes if. Yes, if we do X, Y, and Z, we can achieve what you want to do. Yes, if I need more money. Yes, if I need more time. Yes, if we can solve that problem. Yes, if I get 3 more people to help me solve that problem. But try not to say no unless you absolutely have to. There are going to be times when you need to say no, but whenever you can, don't say no. Say yes if I get these things. It works. Rick Obenshane, never read your own press clippings. When you're down, and you will be down, you're not as bad as you think you are. You're your own worst critic, trust me. When you're up, trust me, you're not that good either. So try and balance it. It's really important. Don Kruger, I think I hit a couple of these. Emotion and logic cannot occupy the same head at the same time. Talked about that. First step in rabbit stew is catch a rabbit. He used to say that all the time. And he was right. Because so many people would say, hey, we're doing X. Well, what about steps 2, 3, and 4? He's like, yeah, we'll worry about 2, 3, and 4 when the time comes. Let's get that rabbit. He didn't say get the rabbit. He would say this phrase. But that was his way of saying constrain the variables. And it worked out very, very well. I talked about being punished for good performance, and I talked about the 15-second job interview. A couple more. Mike Ruszkiewicz, SES CDP, the 3rd time is a charm. I talked about that. Venting can be hazardous to your health. Real quick story. My daughter was sick. My daughter Mary, she was a little squirt. Well, not really sick, but sick enough that she didn't want to go to school, so I brought her with me to work. And Mike Ruszkiewicz, who was, again, director of STAC and then director of engineering, he and I were working on a project called the Earth Science Vision Initiative. And we would take it to the center director at the time, and he was not happy with our progress. We were getting handed our heads on a regular basis. Bring a rock, it was the wrong rock, bring another rock, bring another rock. And I would go home and vent to my wife, not thinking that my daughter was listening. And this went over a period of months. So here I am in this building, walking out with Mike and my daughter and Mary in hand, walking out not this door, but the door on the other side. In walks the center director with his little entourage, and he wants to make nice with the little girl. Hi, Mary, I won't mention the center director's name, but I am so-and-so, glad to meet you. And Mary looks up at him and goes, you're the guy my daddy talks about. Oh, my. I would love to say something very sophisticated came out of my mouth. But I stood there going, what do you say to that? Fortunately, Mike kept his cool, grabbed Mary, Mike and I, friends, knew Mary very well, grabbed her by the arm and said, come on, Mary, we're out of here. And I started a couple more seconds and said, bye. Tucked my tail between my legs and walked out behind him. Jerry Creedon, that's a blinding flash of the obvious. I think you get that one. I won't tell you the story behind that one. Robert Lightfoot, assume positive intent. The job is about the people. Thinking about a new job, it's okay to look for a new job. Do I have to, like...
Keep going. Those who have something to run, they can go. So keep going.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I put 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag for this pitch. If you're looking for a new job, it's one of the things I love about NASA. I was in private industry and other government agencies. They did not encourage you to look for career opportunities. They wanted you focused on what you're working on. NASA, it was a breath of fresh air for me when I came here. Your supervisor, for the most part, I can't speak to every supervisor, but the ones I've run into, very supportive. It's NASA, I'd say, is a career-friendly family. Especially if you're looking for a career advancement, for fulfillment, for increasing responsibilities, or more money. It's okay to say, I want a raise. I did it. It worked. Ease a family situation. I got to change for a family reason, and that's a legitimate reason too. I would ask you to, if you got a bad situation, trying to make the best of it, but when you go into a job interview, it usually is not a good sell to say, I'm trying to run away from something, because then the interviewer is going, is it you or is it the situation? I'm not so sure. But trying to get, so try and work through those kind of issues before you get to a job interview. What should I do? Where should I go? Who do I talk to? Be prepared for multiple sideways steps before the step up. I talked about that, showed you my own experience. I didn't actually go through each of the grades, but you might remember there were a couple of 13s, a couple of 14s, a couple of 15s before I ultimately got into the SES. And even in the SES, there's different tiers. I didn't point those out. I was in a couple of tier 3s before I became tier 2, and then before I became tier 1. It didn't go straight up. It was sideways several times. Get advice from trusting sources, network. Applying for a job coming up, be ready to say yes. I think I've hit that one with pretty hard. Oh, and by the way, again, being positive. Enthusiasm is contagious and is usually rewarded. The results of the application, a lot of folks, even my own son, after I was talking to him about, how are you applying for jobs, Jackson, after he got his degree? Well, I sent in a resume, and he's waiting for them to send him a job offer based upon a resume. I say, it doesn't work like that. In my opinion, if there's anybody from HR who would like to disagree with me, you're welcome to, because I have not run this by the official process. In my humble opinion, the resume's purpose is to get an interview. It is not to get a job. When you're filling out an interview, I'm going to skip the finding an opportunity. I think some of that's obvious. Avoid generic wording. It kind of sounds obvious, but the bottom one where it says tailor resumes, I can't tell you the number of resumes I've seen, even at the SCS level, where people will come up with about a 3/4 of a page blurb on all the things they've done, and they cut and paste it for every one of the ECQs and every one of the technicals. It's like, really? You couldn't take the time to tailor that information for the application? If you are not willing to put in that kind of time for the application, I really don't want you for the job. I want somebody that's going to dedicate some time and willingness to put forth some effort. So tailor the application. Avoid generic wording. And by the way, avoiding generic wording also means don't say things like, George is unparalleled in his field. What does that mean? Love George, but that could mean that George is an idiot. And he's just one amongst many idiots. But no, George is not an idiot, by the way. He's awesome. But I'm getting tired of picking on the front row. I got to pick on some other people. But avoid that kind of wording. Be specific. Use metrics. Talk about the contributions you made in light of, hey, Nick increased the performance 50% over what we did last year when he implemented a new process, implemented a new procedure. That sells. That gets people's attention in a resume. Not, hey, I just invented a new thing. So what? Everybody can invent something new. What did it do? And that's what CCAR is all about. Explain in your resume context, challenge, action, result. Doesn't mean write a book. I can say, hey, I was I was working parts on the XTE program, and that was my context. The challenge is I didn't have enough money to get the job done. My action, it was bad, but I ran negative on my task. The result, though, XTE and trim flew great. Those projects actually met their budget because they didn't have to pay the extra. And they flew on time. But trim re-entered a couple years ago. XTE just re-entered last month. So excellent missions. But be succinct, a couple of paragraphs, no more, on context, challenge, action, result. As your experience builds, filter out the old stuff and tailor your resume. Hit that. The job interview. The job interview is intended to get you the job, not the resume. General advice, know what the job is about. I actually really had somebody come to an interview, and they were spamming the world with applications. And they looked at me and said, well, which job is this for? We didn't need the rest of the time. They were gone. Actually, as a courtesy, I did go through the interview, but no, they weren't even on the list. And by the way, in an interview, if somebody is not clear or not getting it, I throw a bone one time. What do you really mean by that? And because if I don't understand something, and give them a chance to explain. After that, I'm just taking notes. It's up to them to convince me that they're ready for the job, especially the senior jobs. Especially the senior jobs. Know who the interviews are. Don't assume that they've read your application. I'll get into that in a second. Rehearse, practice. Speak loud enough. I'm going to skip a couple. Skip loud enough for everybody to hear you. I have seen people looking down. They're kind of worried about what they're saying, and they don't want to talk. They don't want to make eye contact. Be succinct. Don't ramble. If you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Somebody will start talking about their experience, and then they realize, oh, wow, I went off on a tangent. And they go off on another tangent to try and recover from that tangent, and then another tangent. Next thing you know, the time is up. You are much better off if you think you're blowing something. Just say, sorry, I'm really not being concise on this one. Can we just move on? Stop digging. It's really not hard to do. And finally, I don't want to skip this one. Use experiences when you're answering the questions in a job interview. Hey, you ask about my technical experience. Here's my technical experience. Or here's the jobs I had. And oh, by the way, I worked on this project, this project, this project. Try and get at least 2 in there. But use real experiences so that people don't think that you're just making stuff up. Standard interview questions. These are on every interview. Trust me, they are. They might be worded a little bit differently, but these are the SES level, very senior level job interview questions. You're going to get them. Be ready. Tell me about your background. We don't want to hear everything from birth. What we do want to know is what experiences you have that are applicable to the job, and be succinct. By the way, you'll do these and you want to do them in 45 minutes to an hour, whatever the interview is scheduled for. So pace yourself. You got 10 questions. Your answer better not be more than, say, 5 minutes long for each one, tops. So think about what you're going to do ahead of time. If you were asked these questions, I almost guarantee you're going to be asked these questions. What are your strengths and weaknesses? What are your failures? We talked about those. What are your thoughts on diversity? It's not acceptable to say that, hey, I understand diversity. Talk about what you've done. Hey, I've helped develop a diverse candidate pool. I've made sure that in my organization or in my group, especially if you're looking for a senior job, I've made sure that there are opportunities for everybody, not just any one particular race or one particular gender, one skill level. Diversity is not just race and national origin. It's skill level. It's age. I mean, I can go on, but it's not. There's so much that goes into diversity. Mention those things. Mention something you might have done. It's not acceptable to just say, oh, I'm a woman, therefore I know what all women's needs are, and I'm good with diversity. No. Talk about it. Convince the panel that you know what you're talking about when it comes to diversity. And in a senior position, you're going to be able to handle that senior position and make your team even more diverse. How do you work in teams? How do you tell someone no? We already talked about that. Why are you the best candidate for the position? An excellent answer for that is, I don't know who the other candidates are. Because you don't. So I don't know that I'm the best candidate for the position, but I think I am well positioned for this job. We've covered some of these, but here's why. Let me succinctly tell you why. So don't just say, I don't know. Give an answer on why you think you are the best person for the job. And finally, any questions you have for the panel, you don't have to answer this one, but I would suggest you consider something like, well, when are you going to be making a decision? what is the salary range? How do I go from a GS 15 to an SES, or how do I go from a 14 to a 15? What does it do to my pay? What is the transition period going from my new job to my old job? How can you help me with that? There are a couple of questions you can ask just to show interest and make sure that the people realize you actually thought about it ahead of time. That really does help the decision makers in figuring out who they're going to hire. The SES level ECQs, leading change, leading people, business acumen, building coalitions, and results-oriented. They're kind of self-explanatory in what they mean, and they're on the OPM website. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each one. But when you're applying, you need to come up with 2 examples, or the best way to fill out your application, come up with 2 examples for each one of those, following that CCAR model I told you about. Explain the context, the challenge, the action, the result you took, and any metrics along the way. That's really important to have a very effective resume. Suggest listing, and when you're coming up with those examples, a lot of people try and say, oh, I'm going to come up with 2 for change, 2 for people, 2 for acumen, 2 for coalitions, and 2 for results. It's harder that way. If you list about 10 or so examples of things you've done, and then see which one best fits into each block, it's a little easier. As a matter of fact, it's a lot easier. And then you tailor it for those blocks. You can get ECQs done in about a quarter of the time than doing it the other way. And they're more effective. CCAR is critical. Use metrics. I talked about that. Don't cut and paste. I think I did say there's somebody at Goddard right now who applies for every SES position, and they cut and paste that same block of text. They have not been interviewed yet. It is a multi-tiered process. Remember I said don't assume they read your resume? There is a resume review panel and an interview panel. They can be the same people. Sometimes they're not. So the people who are doing the resume review, and they will rate and rank the resumes they get, or applications, I shouldn't say resumes, and the highly qualified go on for the interviews. And the people in the interview panel may not be the same people. So when you're given examples, it's okay to repeat them. And don't wait for the perfect job. I encourage people, if you're looking for an SES position, apply early, apply as often as makes sense. Don't apply to something that's totally off the wall. But if you think you want to be the head of code 590 or 610 or 670 or 420, don't wait until that job comes up. Apply to a different job. I know she won't mind, but Wanda Peters, I was coaching her for years, getting her ready for the SES, because she asked me to, by the way. If anybody wants me to mentor them, I'd be glad to do that. She just came up to me and said, can you help me? I said, sure. We talked forever. She was in 540 mechanical engineering. I asked her to apply for the 560 job when it came up. And she's like, oh, I'm not qualified for that. I'm not ready to do that. I said, apply anyway. And she's like, no. But I convinced her. I twisted her arm. And she did. In the interview question, one of the questions, why are you applying for this job? I was on the panel. And I could tell she wanted to look at me and goes, because he told me to. But she didn't. She came up with an answer. But it wasn't her stellar. It was her first interview. And she didn't do all that hot on the first interview. But she walked out, and she came to see me like the next day or day after, not too long afterwards. She goes, okay, now I get it. I needed to practice. And she had 3 more interviews before she got to the SES CDP interview. And I'll tell you what, when she got into that SES candidate development interview, she knocked it out of the park. And it was because, and she even tells me this, by the way, I'm not making this up to say, look at me. She even tells me it was that practice that got her to where she was. And she did a great job. And I am so happy Wanda is in 400 helping run flight projects for the Goddard Space Flight Center. She's amazing. So don't wait for the perfect job. It does not work. And by the way, I've seen the others where people did wait for the perfect job. They were like the deer in the headlights in that interview. They didn't get the job. So don't do that. In summary, and you've heard all this. So, they took out the other graphic. Have a career plan, but take advantage of opportunities. Just like combat, your battle plan doesn't continue after the first contact with the enemy. Your career path will probably not follow the plan, and that's okay. Be positive. Positive people get rewarded. Think of challenges as something to overcome, and finally, my dad's quote, work hard, and you will usually be amply rewarded. It happens. But there will be times that only perseverance will carry you through. Thank you for your time.
Dennis, thank you very much. That was wonderful. So you have held many leadership positions. Has there ever been a very tough situation where you didn't know what to decide, did you have someone you went to and asked, could you help me figure this out?
That is a great question. And for those of you who couldn't hear it in the back perhaps, the question was, did I ever have a situation where I had a very difficult situation and I didn't know how to deal with it? Absolutely. I mean, when I'm working with especially some of the technical problems we have here, I get advice from people. And it could be another leader if it's a management question or program project question. If it's a technical question, I go to Henning for everything. No, actually, I go to Henning for anything that's materials related. But you get advice. There's, by the way, a slightly tangential answer is, I try never to be, as a matter of fact, it's easy for me because I'm not that smart. I try not to be the smartest person in the room. I try and surround myself with people who are much smarter than I am. And use them as a resource. It's perfectly okay to say, I don't know. I skipped that part. It's, you know, like in a failure. If you don't know, get help. Ask a question. That will get you the answer. So it's building space stuff is a team sport. If any one person says, I know every answer to every problem for every situation, like the failures, they're not telling the truth. It's a team sport. We need everybody's opinion to succeed.
Yes. I noticed in your resume that most of the positions that you took were very short term, like around 2 to 3 years.
Yes.
What was that challenge like, and how did you quickly transition into a new position?
That's a great question. The question is he's noticing that some of my jobs were, for the most part, 2 to 3 years in length, some of them even shorter than that. And it was tough. You've got to come up to speed as quickly as you can. Ask for help, get help, so you can be as effective as you possibly can. The one thing, and it looks like I can't keep a job, doesn't it? I can assure you I've been laid off, but I've never been fired. So that's a plus. But it is good to get different, especially if you want to become a senior leader, get different perspectives, work in different positions. And in order to get all that, you sometimes do have to change jobs on a regular basis. I've been at headquarters now after I left Goddard for 3 years, 1 month, and 8 days. And I've had 3 jobs. I didn't ask for those jobs. I was asked about the first job. They asked, and then Robert Lightfoot and Lisa Rowe, who are the number 3 and 4 at the agency, asked me to go be the chief technologist for 6 months in acting. I said, sure, I'll go do that. And then I actually had to apply for the SMD job, but I was asked to apply for it. So it wasn't just me going, oh, I want to change jobs again. No, I applied for that. That was another hour-long interview, but I was late getting there because I had another meeting, and right after that interview, I had yet another meeting. So I did my hour-long interview in 30 minutes, just answering the questions as fast as I could. And my new boss, Tom, who is now my new boss, Thomas Zerbuchen, he came to see me a couple days later and said, you didn't do real well in that interview. You should have given us more information. Because he's a very blunt guy. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll buy that. And he said, you're not my first choice, but I'm picking you anyway. So be careful. Getting selected for a job means a lot more responsibility and a lot more work, and I'm putting in a lot of time, but we're having a great time in the Science Mission Directorate. Good question. Other questions, thoughts, comments? You want to go to lunch?
Okay. Let's thank him one more
Thanks.
time.
Yeah.